Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Well, in case any of you haven't realized it yet, distilling is inherently agricultural, and agriculture, to some greater degree or lesser, and my story is what kicked me into high gear on distillation. So as with the maple syrup, I'm sharing some of the other things that we do on the channel here, One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. And one of the things that I love to do, can't even see the damn phone here, see if I can turn around, is play in the dirt. So we're pulling out some Pro Mix today. It's February, early February, and we're starting some seeds, trying to get some stuff going, and I'll keep you up to date as we go. All right, so we're using good old Pro Mix here to get our seeds started, and this stuff comes in super compressed. So typically I put it in a wheelbarrow here, break it up with a hoe a little bit. This stuff is also very hydrophobic at first, which means it won't absorb water. So if you take a little bit of additive free soap, say something like palm olive, and add that to it with some hot water, it'll start soaking up water pretty readily. It's early enough in the season, I'm not starting a lot of tomatoes or peppers or anything like that. Today's gonna be all about starting greens and some tobacco and some other things. And yeah, anyways guys, this is one of the things I love about life and love about living in the middle of nowhere. I love gardening and farming. So the vast majority of times that I'm starting seeds, I actually use these cheap little plastic shoe boxes that I cut some holes in the bottom of for drainage. And I'll use these to start things like tomatoes, tobacco, etc. And I start them in bulk, and then I separate them out and pot them up and keep the plants that I actually want to keep. I've played around with trays and all that kind of stuff over the years, and I've got a lot of that stuff. Honestly, when it comes to this kind of agriculture and what I like to do on a homestead level, I like to keep it simple. And this is about as simple as it gets. So I'm going to fill this thing up with some soil, enough to get the seeds started in. And then once those seeds get up and going, we'll start separating them out into pots on their own. All right, so the first thing I'm going to start this year is a little bit of tobacco. I grew up on a tobacco farm. We don't do that anymore, but I do try to grow tobacco every year, every other year. I save some back and cure it down, maybe spray it down with some brandy, ferment it, etc. And use it for pipe tobacco, just to kind of remind me of where I came from. So as you can see, tobacco seed is tiny. This is a sort of a mixture of crossing varietals back and forth. There's, selections from over, 15 years, 20 years probably of growing different strains. So we're literally just going to take a couple pinches of this, spread it out across the surface of this tray as well as what we can, and then press the tobacco seed down in there lightly. You don't actually want to cover it up, but even a little pinch of this is going to be several hundred plants, and I only need about maybe 5 to 10. So this actually, when we used to do this in the fields, we'd mix it with sand. When our tobacco starting beds, you mix it with sand and it spreads much easier. See, I just dropped way too much in one spot there. That's all right though. We can thin it out as it grows. All right, and I'm just gonna take my hand and kind of press that down in there. And there's our tobacco seed started for the year. All right, so these are excuse me, these are pits from the infamous Fleenor peach trees that I've been cultivating on the farm now for I guess about a decade or more. So this variety is the variety that built Hoosier peach brandy. So apple brandy is of course what we were famous for. Peach brandy was a close second, and peach brandy was actually what was preferred here locally in what was called the Black Forest region of Washington, Orange, Crawford, Harrison, Perry, and Lawrence counties in the Black Forest. These peaches were brought here by John and Abraham Fleenor in 1806, 1807. John was the very first distiller in the state of Indiana that we can prove via local taxes was actually distilling here in the state of Indiana, just north of Salem, Indiana, and Washington County, out by what's called Delaney Creek Bottoms now. Out there as well, Abraham, his brother, who was an orchardist, brought these peach seeds from Virginia, where they were endemic, probably traded there by the Spaniards to the Native Americans very early on. And there are even accounts on the East Coast of how prolific the peaches that the Native Americans had were, and that you could go in and cut down a pine forest, and within the next year you just have a huge orchard of wild peach trees. Anyways, This peach built quite an industry around it, and pretty much every distillery in Indiana would have had these peaches growing around them. These peaches do come back mostly true from seed. They are more of a landrace than an actual fixed variety. They tend to be I'll get the word out in a minute. Predominantly white, small, golf ball or slightly larger clingstone peaches with a very nice acid to sugar balance. Fantastic for brandy production. Occasionally you'll get a really great one to eat out of hand, but that's fairly rare with these varieties. They were used sometimes by some of the old timers in sort of an underripe state for pickled peaches. I've never had that. I'm not sure that I want it. Might be really good, who knows. But nonetheless, these things still grow wild around pretty much every old still site that hasn't been developed that I've ever been to in the 6-county region. If you find these things growing in a grove anywhere around southern Indiana, it's likely that you're very near to an old still site. These things were actually shipped all over the United States from in the northeastern United States from old nursery books, including a huge nursery that was in Livonia, Indiana, and one just outside of Pekin, Indiana. They came here because they were being used by John and Abraham's father, Nicholas, who was a very famous brandy distiller back in Virginia. Now, they have a really unique methodology of crop management, and the way that these were actually managed was they would basically go in and plow out a field just like you're going to plant a garden or a field crop, whatever, lay off your rows. They tended to be 15 to 30 foot centers, and then they would go through and they plant these seeds by hand in that row, just like garden seed. The seed would come up that next spring, and then that next spring you would also lay off another field right next to it and plant that. And you would do that every year on a 7-year cycle. And the reason for that is because these are more of a weedy type peach tree, so they don't last real long. Generally 7 to 10 years is sort of their height, and then they are kind of done and they start to decline after that. So it's important to keep them going at all times so that you don't run out of them. And the way they were managed is after that 7-year period, you'd go back to that first field after the last crop, and you'd cut those trees down. Well, there's wood for your still to make the Fleenor peach brandy with. So I've been trying to restore this thing all across southern Indiana anywhere that I can to try to get enough peaches to be able to distill this on a commercial basis. It's going to be a long haul, and hopefully other people will catch on to it. I have distributed trees and seeds locally for many years of this variety, and I do plant them in various different places around the county. I won't necessarily tell anybody where, so that they never die out. They never did die out, but for a long time I had a hard time tracking this thing down. I heard stories of it, I'd seen pictures of it, but never could find them. And I did finally end up finding about 4 or 5 good, healthy repositories for this peach throughout Washington County, Indiana, where it of course became nativized too. So we're going to take some of these. I don't really need to start these in the greenhouse, although I don't mind to start some of them, and I'll probably do like 4 or 5 flats of them eventually. But I like to start a few of them and then plant them out in the nursery, and then I can transplant them after a year or two once I get some size to them wherever I want them at. So we're just literally going to take these and lay a layer of them on top of this soil here, and then cover them over with that soil, set them in here, and let them germinate as they do. All right, so this is our tiny little greenhouse behind our house. So I think it's a 8 by 12 if I remember right, but primarily we use it for our forced air wood stove to heat the house with, but we do also use it sometimes for catch-all, as you'll see when I show you around. But we also we keep benches in here, obviously, to raise a little bit of food and or start our seeds in. So that's what you're seeing there is the benches. It is a little bit of a mess right now in the wintertime and the summertime when it's not really used for food production or seed production. It does get to be a little bit of a mess. I think it's very important, if you have space for a greenhouse and space for a garden, you ought to be growing one. You ought to get you a little greenhouse. I have several larger greenhouses. I was in the nursery business and produce business for many years, and they're up on the farm, and they're in bad need of repairs and getting back up and productive, and I do intend to do that sometime in the near future. But you gotta have time for it, and you gotta make time for it. So we'll get there.